Welcome. I'm Ron Baker, Director of the Canadian Small Church Ministry Centre, sponsored by Small Church Connections. And this is us, Canadian Churches in Action podcast. I have been looking forward to this time as Ontarioites are currently moving back into the cold, which we had the last week or two. And we are moving into the beautiful 0-degree weather that just makes you want to get up in the morning. Okay, maybe not that quickly, but at least a little bit. Our guest today is from a beautiful part of Muskoka, Bracebridge, Ontario. I don't want to say much more. I'll let her introduce herself and let her talk just a little bit about her own ministry experience as we think of small churches and that type of thing. I think we've got some good thoughts that are going to come out of this today. So I'm going to turn it over to our guest today, and she can tell you who she is and a little bit of background and whatever you want to go for.
Great, thank you. I'm the first thing that comes to my mind is, isn't it sad when we're excited about 0-degree weather? But really I woke up to minus 33 this morning, so yeah, 0 sounds pretty good. So I'm hoping what you have now is coming our way.
I sure hope so.
Well, my name's Heather Malnick, and I am the minister at Knox Presbyterian Church in Bracebridge, Ontario, which is a wonderful part of Muskoka, which is cottage country in Ontario, surrounded by wonderful lakes, rocks, and trees. Lakes, rocks, and trees, lakes, rocks, and trees. That's what we have in our landscape. And people flock from around southern Ontario to cottage here and to have their vacation time here. But Bracebridge itself is a wonderful, stable community. The Presbyterian Church has been in town, has been a presence in Bracebridge since the Presbyterian Church in Canada was officially formed in 1875. So we have deep roots, but hopefully we've been learning how to shift and how to be reformed and always reforming, as we like to say in the Presbyterian Church, to respond to the needs around us. So I have been the minister here, the first female minister here, since 2018. Thanksgiving Sunday of 2018 was my first Sunday here. And before that, though, I spent 23 years with what is now called Living Faith Community Presbyterian Church in Baxter, Ontario, which is a small town about an hour north of Toronto. And that Living Faith was formed when two small declining congregations decided to amalgamate and do something new. But it was quite a journey that got us to that point. So I don't know if you want me to share about that journey.
Yeah. I'd love to hear a little bit of that journey. You know, why would two churches want to combine? Was there a particular reason? And well, I'll let you go at it.
Sure. So way before it became Living Faith, it was a 3-point pastoral charge that encompassed Cookstown, Baxter, and Ivy, all very small congregations, Cookstown being the largest of them, with an average attendance probably between 50 and 60. And then Baxter, which was where I was a member, was the smallest. I can remember the building out of the 3 was the least equipped. We didn't have hot running water. We didn't have a phone. We lived in an area where cell phone reception was very sketchy. So I had lots of broken up phone calls trying to contact families or whatever from the church. And then Ivy is in a very active farming community, and it was the mid-size of the 3. And so for several decades, it was a 3-point pastoral charge. Yep. And it was gradually declining, like many sort of longstanding mainline churches. It was just gradually declining in congregational size, and then the demands of the buildings was growing. They were aging. They required a lot of maintenance. A lot of money went into trying to maintain these churches. And so we had a minister that came. Her name is Carol Smith, and she was called to this 3-point charge. And she quickly realized that this was not a sustainable method of ministry. She identified that we were in maintenance mode, and she really encouraged us to transition to mission mode. So because we were so inward focused and trying to just keep our buildings, our roofs over our
Yeah.
heads,
And little rain
we
coming,
really,
no rain coming in. Yeah.
yeah. And in Baxter it was the opposite. We had so much flooding. The rain, the groundwater flooded the basement at least twice a year, caused problems with
Yeah.
mold and things like that. It was just nasty. And so because we were so focused on that, we neglected to really be outward focused and looking at our communities. So Carol really encouraged us to transition. And so we started really intentionally looking at ways that we could be more helpful to our communities. We started a program using Ken and Callahan's 12 Keys to an Effective Church, which I highly recommend, and I have used it several times with small groups and with leadership teams. And it was a year process.
The name again
It's
is
12 Keys to an Effective Church. Actually, I have it. It's never too far from my desk. So 12
right.
to an Effective Church. And it's a very practical, biblically based book. So it's almost like a Bible study. But Ken and Callahan also has the groups, look into your demographics, look into your history, check out your stats, get demographic information from your local townships, from Stats Canada, that type of thing. So we went through a process with 2 members from each of the 3 congregations involved in that process. And so we called it the Growth Committee, and we met monthly, and every member of that committee was tasked with presenting one of the chapters. And it was through that process that we realized, we could really be so much more effective if we work together instead of 3 separate congregations, each one, as you know, you can have the same minister, but each congregation has its own distinct personality.
Ministry.
And like I say, it was called cluster ministry. Now it's more commonly known as regional ministry. That would be more effective than trying and so the funding that we received from the National Church allowed us to form a ministry team. So I was hired as the Christian education consultant. Our minister was the minister for the 3 congregations. We had a pastoral care coordinator and an admin person. So 4 people formed this ministry team. And it eventually evolved. So instead of each separate congregation having its own, like Sunday school superintendent, youth group, that became my responsibility. And then I oversaw it for that region, for the 3 churches. Our pastoral care coordinator did, the day-to-day pastoral care for the 3 congregations and the 3 communities. So it was just shared, intentionally shared. And then we started.
Let me ask just a quick question. Geographically, how close would each congregation be? Like, are we talking kilometers or across the country?
And that was the challenge, and I think that's what probably led to the next step. So Cookstown was the furthest south, which would have been about half an hour from Baxter. And then Baxter and Ivy were about 10 minutes away. So the biggest challenge was still Sunday morning. Right. It all sounded very good to be sharing all of these different tasks. And we started doing more things intentionally together, like a Sunday evening once a month, we would have a joint worship service together, and all 3 congregations would assist with the leadership. But the Sunday morning was still a challenge. And I don't know how many speeding tickets Carol got going from one church to the next, or how many white knuckle drives in the middle of winter, because nobody wanted to budge on their service time. Everybody still wanted to keep their same service time. And so that was a challenge. So one way that we attacked that challenge was we started eventually that Carol would lead the service at 2 of the churches, and one of us on the ministry team would take the 3rd. So it wasn't that bad of a white knuckle drive for
Right.
her on Sunday mornings. And so that seemed to work well. And we rotated, and, you know, everybody felt like they had their time with the minister. And then it ended up that through that process, that's when I sensed a call to ministry, which was sort of more externally brought to my attention before it was internally realized. And so in 2002, I went back to school. Or no, in 2000, I went back to school. In 2002, I graduated with a Bachelor of Religious Education from Tyndale, and then still felt that I was being called to a different type of ministry, to ordained ministry. So in 2003, I attended Knox College at University of Toronto, which is our denomination's seminary for this part of the country, and graduated in 2006. So I'm sort of jumping ahead here. When we started doing the intentional ministries together, that was a 3-year experiment that was financed by a portion of it by our national church. And then when it came to the 3rd year, we sort of felt like we had to like move forward. We really found that we were much more effective in reaching our community when we did work together. And then we were very focused on community needs evangelism. And it turns out that the little church in Baxter, which was the least equipped of the 3, had the best location. It was situated, still is, right across the street from an elementary school. So one of the things we did as part of this 12 Keys to an Effective Church is we did a community survey. And it turns out that in Baxter, one of the main needs at that time in the community was for after school care. Baxter's located quite close to one of the main highways that heads to Toronto, the 400.
Oh, yeah.
So a lot of parents were working in Toronto or working at the Honda plant in Alliston, and kids were coming home from little school right across the street from our church to empty homes, like latchkey kids. And so after doing that survey and having a conversation about how can we respond to this need, we started an after school club, and which is still, well, not during COVID, but is still one of the main ministries at Living Faith. And that way we really connected with the community. They came to the after school club as filling a need that they had, parents, and then they really connected with the congregation. Now, that doesn't mean that we saw many of them on Sunday mornings, and that wasn't the point, but they would have called Living Faith their church coming on Thursday. And then we expanded that after school club to eventually include Messy Church. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Messy Church movement.
I think, yes, I have heard of Messy Church and, you know, Sticky Church and all sorts of churches. Yes, we're getting into that. Yeah.
And that came out of the UK, and it was a wonderful way to sort of make that connection with families. So instead, one Thursday a month, instead of picking up their kids from after school club and heading home, they would stay and we'd have a meal together and very interactive worship and activities. And it was a lot of fun. So we realized that our locations were again hindering us. They were fragmenting us, and we felt like we could perhaps be more effective in one location. So that, and again, it was through this process of going through prayer and discussions. We had speakers come in to speak with us about different methods of being the church. And through that process, 2 of the congregations, Baxter and Cookstown, decided that they would like to amalgamate. Now, that invitation was put to all 3 congregations, but Ivy decided it wanted to stay on its own, and it still is on its own, and is still doing very effective ministry in its farming community. But Baxter Cookstown made the decision to amalgamate. It was approved by the congregations. It was approved by our presbytery, and then it became official January 1st, 2004. So we sold our buildings and we started worshiping in that little school in Baxter in the gymnasium.
Yeah.
However, I have to say, Christmas Eve of 2003 was our minister, Carol Smith's final service. She decided that her time there had come to an end. And so she resigned from her position. And I had just started attending Knox College that autumn. And so the presbytery appointed me to be the student minister there. And I can tell you that Christmas Eve service was terrifying because I knew Carol was leaving.
Yeah.
And then it was going to turn to me with the wonderful ministry team, never me on my own. But then it was like, oh my God, we have no home. We've sold our buildings.
Yeah.
We're in a church. We had purchased land, but we still hadn't built a new church yet.
Yeah.
So that was quite terrifying.
Okay, that's a good way to start, vocational ministry. Yeah, wow. Okay. Okay, and you survived.
We survived, yes. And in 2007, we thought we would be in the school for 2 years. It ended up being closer to 4. And Thanksgiving seemed to be significant Sundays in my ministry. But Thanksgiving Sunday in 2007, we held our first worship service in the new building, which we then called Living Faith Community Presbyterian Church.
Yeah. That has been a journey, to say the least.
So it was a very gradual process. So in 2000, starting this cluster ministry, regional ministry, which then led to amalgamation, which took effect in 2004, which then led to the construction of the new building in 2007, which was located on 5 acres of land beside the little Baxter Presbyterian Church. So it was still across the street from that school. So that still remains the focus ministry for Living Faith, is ministry to elementary school age children and their families.
Yeah, okay. So if you, when you look at that, how are there points at which you would say, or a matrix that you would use to say it's been successful in combining these two churches? Or do you have some way of saying, this is worked or it's working well?
Yeah, I would say it's been very successful. And it just shows, I think, what can happen when congregations work together instead of trying to be all for all. They really, and again, it was a process. And sometimes we have to deal with a little bit of pride too. We want to keep our buildings. We want to keep doing things the way that we think they should be going. But when we sort of got past that and saw the effectiveness of what can happen when we work together, I think, God really blessed that. And we felt very inept, like we didn't have any builders or anything like that in our congregation. We really relied on God's, because we had no other person to rely on. And God was faithful to us. And so when I gauge like success, it wouldn't be numerically, although it is a very healthy congregation with like pre-COVID, and when I left. So like I said, in 2018, I really felt called to Bracebridge. My husband had just retired. Both our moms had just passed away. So it just seemed like a time for a change in our family life. But then also this call to the congregation here, which had actually asked if I was interested in coming about 6 years prior. But it hadn't, just timing was not right for us family-wise and my husband's work-wise. And so then when they came calling again, it was like, oh, maybe we should pay attention to this time. So when I left, and that was pre-COVID, I would say numerically the average Sunday attendance was 120. So that had grown. And I think because we were in the school for those 4 years, which is neutral territory. So we really grew a lot when we were at the school because people didn't feel, for us in church world, we're not say too much intimidated about walking into
Yeah.
a church building. But if that's not your background, it's very intimidating. And you worry about, I'm going to sit in the wrong seat. Am I going to offend somebody? Am I wearing the right clothing? But people felt comfortable going into the school building. It was neutral territory. It was like that third space.
Yeah.
And so so we did grow there. And then when the new church opened, everybody wants to be part of something brand new. And so that was another time when we grew again. An interesting little thing that we discovered, though, is after 10 years in the new building, so in 2017, we realized that we needed to expand our Sunday school space. And so we had, a project, a campaign to build an addition. And it was very interesting that the people that had the hardest time sort of catching that vision were those people who had joined us since we moved into the new church. Those who had been along for the whole journey, they're like, oh yeah, sure, we can do that. We've been through so much change, bring it on, we can do more. But those who had joined us after 2007 had joined us when we looked a certain way. And they're the ones that wanted us to stay looking that certain way.
Yeah.
However, they did catch the vision and they did build. It was a portable that we brought in to provide more space.
Yeah. I hate to do this, but I'm going to jump to a whole other topic here. And in part because I hear some threads that go into COVID here and our sessions in COVID, which have been just, I don't know. I've almost come to the idea of having a new slogan for my life, which is instead of one day at a time, it's one moment at a time. And it just, you just don't know what's coming next. Now, for yourself, I mean, here you talked about 3 different congregations, each with their own buildings, combining, selling buildings, building a new building. In COVID, we've run across again that whole question of facilities and congregations and people and how you deal with that. You had mentioned prior to starting this podcast that you had some maybe new ideas about how we could approach what has been happening in these last 2 years. And I just want to let you run with some of that and let us hear some of your thoughts.
Sure. And I'm sorry for all the jibber jabber, but
No, keep going.
it is
I love
something
it.
that's so passionate in my life. Is just this idea we have. I think if we miss this opportunity and if we go back to the way church had been, then we've missed out. Like I really feel like this is a time for reformation. I've always said that God is a God of timing. And, it's been just over 500 years since the last Reformation. So I think we're really due.
It's time.
It's time, maybe overdue. And what COVID has done is sort of fast-tracked everything that we might have been thinking about before and has just sort of flown it right in our faces and, has told us you need to respond. So online church, for example, was something that we had just started getting into January of 2020. And then boom, March we're shut down and that becomes our focus, our main way. So actually people just showed up here at the church. We're getting some more equipment installed. We've had to do the whole updated video camera instead of just using my little cell phone to record and the sound and all of that. But I think this is a wonderful opportunity for us to really sort of step back. When I was doing my doctoral work, I remember a professor saying we need to get off the dance floor into the balcony for a little bit and look down on the dance floor and just see where are the steps taking us, what music is playing and how do we respond to it. But if we don't take some time in the balcony, and I think this is balcony time, then we're going to step back on the dance floor and trip over our feet. So our presbytery it has just initiated a conversation about this. And I mentioned to you some of the situations that we're facing as a presbytery, which I know are not unique to us.
Right.
And that's the fact that half of our congregations within our geographic region, we're with the Presbytery of Barrie, are vacant. And so that means that the remaining ministers are sort of doing double duty because we need to provide pastoral care and interim moderators for those vacant congregations. And a number of those are not now and may never be in a position to be able to call a minister with finances numerically and just sort of fatigue. I think so many people are tired, and those remaining in some of those congregations are just, they don't want to do it anymore. But that doesn't mean those ministries come to an end. So because we've sort of embraced, some of us, maybe not all of us, this online worship experience, it does give us the opportunity to rethink the Sunday morning experience and the use of our geography, our buildings, our real estate. And I was saying to you, I used to be of the mind that none of us should be sitting on money. We should be, renting space, getting rid of these money pit churches and using all this money for ministry. But then I thought, we have a gift. We've been blessed with this real estate. Some of our congregations, and most, I think, of established churches, have mortgage payments. So our buildings are free and clear. Money goes into maintenance. But how can we rethink how we use this real estate, this blessing that we've been given? And so we've been sort of toying with this idea of hubs or regional ministry, sort of taking that cluster ministry idea, but expanding it. And so like perhaps for our situation, looking at different regions within the presbytery and creating these hubs where one or two churches that say have full-time staff and have those types of resources could sort of create an umbrella where the Sunday morning worship experience may not need to take place in each individual building within that geographic region, but it could take place at the main church, or whatever you want to call it, at the mother church, and that could be in person when that time comes, or it can be online. But we still keep those little churches because they're gifts to their communities. And then maybe do like community surveys like we did through the 12 Keys program and find out what are the needs, the specific, practical, pragmatic needs in those little individual communities. And how can that church building and those people associated with the congregation fill that need using their real estate, using their gifts, but they don't have to worry about the financial challenges of trying to hire, a minister. All of that goes with it, trying to hire, music staff. That burden could be lifted and shared, but each one could be more sort of community focused. It's a dream right now, but we'll just see how that conversation plays out.
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to hearing how that conversation plays out. Unfortunately, our conversation is about played out already too. So thank you very much. I have just enjoyed this, and blessings on you and the ministry, and looking into the future to see where God's taking you. May this be just a great time for you. Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks so much for your wisdom and your companionship in this conversation.
Thank you.